Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Getting back to work on the Gladiator in this video. Been a while since I've done anything with it, but before the weather totally turns, I need to get some suspension work done. I've had a set of Rock Krawler 3.5-inch lift springs sitting in my garage for a little over a year now, waiting to go in, as well as some of the other items and go-withs that go with that swap. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead, get the phone turned around, and get to work on the truck. All right, so this is going to be a two-parter because I am doing a lot with each portion of this swap. So I am going to start on the rear, and what this is going to be all about is removing the current 2-inch spacers that I have in there with the stock Rubicon springs. I also have a Clayton adjustable rear track bar, and then I also went ahead and got from Rock Jock shock extensions. They're 1.5-inch because the Bilsteins that I have in this are set for a 1.5 to 2.5-inch lift, and I'm obviously going beyond that with a 3.5. So if I use the 1.5-inch extension, I should be good. And yes, you may ask why I don't just get new shocks. Reason being is I'm not sure if I still like the Bilsteins or not. It got rid of the floaty ride of the Rubicon Fox shocks, but they're actually a little on the stiff side. I'm wondering if that's mixed with the Rubicon springs or if it's the shock itself. So I want to keep these for now, see how they do with the new springs, if that softens the ride up, because I've heard these Rock Krawler springs have a nicer ride to them, and then kind of go from there. So that's it in a nutshell, what's going to be going on the rear. So like I said, it's going to be shock extensions, new springs, bump stop extensions from EVO, forgot to mention those, adjusting the current EVO sway bar end links. I'll have to lengthen those 1.5 inches for the new spring height, and then the new Clayton track bar. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead, get the lug nuts loosened, get this thing up in the air, and get the rear wheels off so I can start tackling the suspension. All right, wheels are off, and I apologize. My neighbor just started running his weed whacker, so hopefully you can hear me over that noise. But one thing to note is I already have extended brake lines, and I've already extended my ABS line. Went over that in a previous video, so that's not an issue here. So basically, it is going to be getting the shocks loosened up, loosening up all of the control arm bolts, and then removing the upper sway bar link bolts and removing the actual stock track bar. So once all those things are removed, loosened, etc., can start trying to drop down the rear end and get the old springs out along with the spacers. You can see the 2-inch spacers there, mixed with the stock Rubicon springs. Again, those will be replaced with 3.5-inch lift springs from Rock Krawler. So I'm gonna go ahead, grab some tools, grab an air gun, because you're pretty much gonna need that to start loosening all of these control arm bolts and get things going. All right, so both sides I've gone and loosened both ends of the upper and lower control arms. The bolt sides are going to be 21s, the nuts are 24s. Everything's disconnected back here as far as the sway bars go. I've gone ahead and removed the track bar, and then I also went ahead and I lubed the end links on the sway bar because they were a little stiff. So that is all good there. So next is going to be loosening up the shocks side by side and dropping the rear end to get the old springs and spacers out. All right, and the lower shock through bolts, I'm not going to take the tops out. I don't think I need to. These are both 21 head here and a 21 nut. I've got the nuts removed on both sides, so all that is holding the bolt in is the tension because there's still a jack under the rear end. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got the control arms all loose like I said previously. I need to just remove the clamp and the vent line from the differential so I'm not tensioning that, and then I should be able to start lowering the jack and pry the springs out one by one on each side once I remove the shock on each side. So again, I will do one side, then the other, trying to pry it out once I take the jack or the rear shock out. So I'm gonna go ahead and get to work. All right, as you can see, springs are out on both sides. As you can see right there, I did go ahead and disconnect the vent tube from the axle so it would have full droop, and I also loosened the retainer for my rear locker off of the stud just to give a little more play in the wiring there. But yeah, I just did one side at a time and just put a jack under basically where the shock mount was, so I could go ahead and get the tension off of the bolt going through, and just slid the bolt out and then dropped the side and then came over and did the other side. So that being said, that is all good. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off the spring perches real quick just so they got some dirt and grit and grime on them, and then grab the new springs, and I can start walking through the installation. All right, well, here are the coils that are going in. These are used. I got these from a friend of mine. They were low mileage takeouts when he went to a different setup. So again, these are the Rock Krawler 3.5-inch lift springs. Now, please note with the rears, you are going to have two different spacers. The thicker spacer is for the passenger side, because this is to account for where the gas tank is and the extra weight on that side. So keep that in mind. You're gonna have a thicker spacer on the passenger side. So it's pretty much just, same thing you did before. If your upper perches did not fall out, which mine did not, make sure they stay in place, because you do have that pin in the upper perch that needs to go into the frame to locate it properly. But other than that, it's going to be walking these springs and spacers up onto the axle accordingly, and then installing the shocks to hold everything in place. So I'm going to go ahead and at least start getting these put into place if I can, and then I'll come back because I'm going to have to walk through the shock spacers that I'm installing, because I don't believe these shocks will be long enough to reach with these springs. All right, and first spring is in place. All right, so a couple things to keep in mind. Again, you want to make sure that the upper perch does not move. There should be a little tab that you'll see poking up. It's hard to see, but if you get your head up in there, I forget what side it's on back here, but you'll see the tab poke through to make sure your upper perch is in place. Second, with that, the end of the spring on the top, you want to make sure that's seated in the most recessed portion of that pad. And then down low, the perches are marked F and R, so you have the direction that you need for these lower spacers. So again, this is the passenger side, this is the thicker one. Driver's side is going to be thinner, obviously. So those are the things to keep in mind. As you can see here, shock is going to be way too short, so that is why I did get these spacers that I got. So I'm going to go ahead and work on the other side, and then we'll start addressing getting the shocks hooked up, because those are going to involve multi-piece brackets, and it appears I do have to drill a hole, because according to the instructions, there's supposed to be a hole there for the bracket to mount to that bracket, but I have no such hole with my setup. And real quick, I put a jack under this side, and now you can see that little tab sticking up through the hole that I was talking about. This is on the passenger side, so just make sure that you have that. So now I'm gonna head over to the driver's side and get that one installed. All right, as you can see, other side's in. I'm just kind of filming from this side because it's in the sun and there's a little bit of a glare and whatnot. So all good there. Springs are set in place. I made sure, everything stayed lined up as far as the upper perch goes. And, the F is in the F, the R is in the R on the lower perches. So all good there. So next is going to be the shock extensions. So I'm going to go ahead and get the kit and show you what I need to install. All right, so these are the brackets. It's a two-piece bracket. You're going to get the two brackets for each side, through bolt to replace the factory shock bolt where it goes through the factory mount, and then you'll reuse the stock one going through the other spot, washer's nut, and then there's this bolt and nut to hold the two halves together through these holes. Problem is, in their instructions online, which is part of like their general installation kit for an entire suspension system, there are already holes shown in the shock mount on the vehicle they're working on, and they were just able to go through those holes. My Gladiator does not have those holes, so what I'm gonna have to do is mock up where these go roughly, drill a hole in the bracket that's on the axle, and then I can go ahead and get them installed. So to do that, I'm going to use just one half, align it with the factory hole, and then just mark the spot and drill it out. All right, so here's a rough mock-up of the brackets installed. I'm probably going to use the other bolt on the bottom and the factory shock bolt on the top when all is said and done and installed, but this was just to kind of get a feeler for it. But you can see one bracket stays on the inside of the factory bracket, and the other is on the outside, and it all gets sandwiched with that one bolt and nut. But again, no hole there. So I'm gonna go ahead, mark that spot, and grab a drill a hole out, and then I can go ahead and get this bracket installed. All right, well, and if you do it right, this is what you will have. You'll see the nut and bolt holding everything in place. Again, one bracket on one side, one on the other. Lower through bolts with the spacer and everything there. And then next is going to be to jack this up and get the shock mounted inside there, and I'll use the factory bolt and nut to get the shock mounted and then get everything torqued to spec. All right, so both these are torqued to 75 foot-pounds. Just take notice of orientation of how everything goes through there. The new bolts that came with the kit, these are 22 and 22 mil. The factories, again, are 21 and 21, so you'll need a couple wrenches and sockets handy. And previously I said tighten that down first. No, do not do that, because if you tighten that down first, you're gonna have a hard time getting the shock in the bracket. So get all this torqued first, and then go ahead and just snug down that bolt and nut that holds the bracket indexed to the axle. So now that this side is done, I am gonna go repeat on the other side. All right, and driver's side is in, and the shock parts are all torqued and ready to go. So that is it as far as the retention that way goes. So next on the list is going to be getting jack under the center of the rear axle assembly and starting to look into hooking back up the sway bar end links. I am going to need to lengthen these. These were they were previously set to 12 inches long, center hole to center hole, or 12 and a half based on the prior suspension. Since I've now gone up another inch and a half from 2 inches to 3.5, I am going to lengthen those to 14 inches center hole to center hole. So I'm going to go ahead and get the jack under the center of the axle, get this thing up in the air to the point where it is off the jack stands ever so slightly, and then I'm going to torque down all of the control arm bolts and get those all tightened back down, and then I'll start messing around with the sway bar and the track bar. All right, I have it up in the air to the point where it's just off of the jack stands, so I'm going to start with the upper control arms. It is 95 foot-pounds where it goes to the axle, 120 foot-pounds where it goes to the frame. So I'm going to grab the torque wrench and get these things tightened down. All right, uppers are done. Now it's time to do the lowers. The lowers are 90 foot-pounds each, both front and rear. All right, everything torqued on the passenger side, and go repeat on the driver's side. All right, driver's side done. Next on the list, I want to get the sway bar. I lifted it up to get the holes to line up. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten down the mounting bolts, and then I need to extend the center section. So I have 14 inches bolt to bolt. All right, both sway bar end links extended to 14 inches, bolts put back in, torque to 50 foot-pounds. If you have these adjustable links, make sure your ends kind of line up and it's not like, one angled one way, one angled the other. You want them to be pretty even, but that is all set there. Next, I need to put on the bump stop extensions. Then it is going to be the track bar, and then we are done. All right, EVO 3-inch bump stop extensions are on both sides. The instructions don't really say much. They have an angle to them. I angled them forward. As you can see, it seems to line up best with where the bump stops are. There's 2 bolts, nuts, and washers on each side. Pretty self-explanatory as far as where the holes are on your axle. I used just 2 half-inch wrenches because it is a pretty tight fit to get into each of them. So be warned, it takes a little longer than you will think it will, but not too bad. So now that all that is in, I just need to reconnect the vent for my differential. I'm probably going to disconnect one of the clips holding it to the body just to give myself, more length at droop and whatnot, and then it's going to be put the wheels on, and last thing will be the track bar once the thing is back on the ground. All right, as you can see, wheels back on, and it is back on the ground. Still haven't put the new track bar in yet. That's the Clayton track bar that's going to go in. This is the best way to do it. Is you want to get it on the ground, let the body settle, just give it a little rock back and forth, and then it's pretty much going to be putting the bar in and lining up the holes. I'll walk you through that in a second. First thing I'm going to do is crawl under there and reconnect the vent and get all that stuff, make sure that nothing's going to bind up, and then it'll be time to do the track bar. Real quick, what I was talking about is I disconnected that one there, pulled it out of this hole, so it just gives a little more play there. And then same thing, you see one tab that I pulled out from there, just more play as far as the vent tube goes, and everything is hooked back up. All right, here's the new track bar from Clayton, pretty straightforward. This is meant to fit around a large spare tire. So what you do is you put the fixed end in the axle side, so that's gonna be on the driver's side first. It has, if you look at it, like looking down, that bend there pitches forward. So you want that going forward and the upside towards the front of the vehicle. And then once that's in and somewhat snug but still movable, you basically just unscrew this until you can get this to go in the frame side hole loosely, run all the hardware through and get it torqued. All right, and both ends torqued to 90 foot-pounds. And I used a big ass crescent wrench and tightened down the jam nut, so we are all set. All right, one quick correction. I just took a double check at the Clayton instructions, and they want you to torque the axle side to 100 foot-pounds and the frame side to 95 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna go grab the torque wrench again and get those corrected. All right, rear wheels torqued, and that is job done. They're torqued to 130 foot-pounds. So yeah, all set as far as the rear suspension goes. So like I said in the beginning, I'm going to end this video here, wrapping up the rear. Next video on the truck will be obviously on doing the front, because I've got these same springs and additional parts to install up there. So if you like what you're seeing, you want to follow along, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I do review them. I will reply. I do have a second YouTube channel devoted to firearms. If that is something that interests you, please check it out. There's a link in the description below. I also have a Rumble channel where I'm posting the same firearm content. Link in the description as well. If you're on Rumble, I'd appreciate it if you would like me and follow me there. I also have some merch for sale. You probably see some stuff below the video. If not, there is a link in the description as well. That being said, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.